Thank you so much, Pina. It's great to be here. Thanks for organizing this wonderful event. So I have the pleasure of hosting the second panel, and the title of our panel is The Future of Works, Media, the Arts, and AI. And contrary to Mark, in the prep we had, we did not have heated debates around the title of our thing. We did not feel the need to add punctuation. However, we did feel that we all agreed on the absolute importance of having a discussion on this very important topic, because as you all know very well, AI, the fast adoption of AI technologies has already disrupted the media and art sectors, and it's going to be a very interesting discussion today with these distinguished panelists. So maybe just a few more words from where I sit. I'm responsible for the cultural industries and a range of programs and initiative areas in terms of supporting the media and broadcasting. And what we see, what we hear every day is that AI presents great challenges, great opportunities, but also many, many challenges. In terms of the opportunities, we know that it has the power to enhance creative process, streamline workflows, it can reduce costs, and as you know, with the media crisis and the art sector that is, struggling to recover from the pandemic, that's certainly an opportunity. However, huge challenges in terms of job security, wages, work conditions. We've already seen major labor disputes as in the U.S. There's lawsuits already with respect to authorship, copyright, and we also can see huge challenges in terms of the media, AI-generated content, in terms of disinformation, disinformation, which leads to greater distrust in public institutions and affecting democracy. So these are huge challenges. There's also ethical implications that we will be discussing because there's potential for bias in AI-generated content with impact on cultural diversity and representation. So with that, I will now open it up for this very complex topic to be addressed by my colleagues here. I will introduce them briefly, but then in our first round of introductions, they will tell you more about how they relate to this topic. So I will start with Lior at the end, Lior Zemer, who's the Dean Director, MA in Law Technology and Business Innovation at the Radzyner Law School at Reichman University. That's our colleague here. And then we have beside me Susan Abramovitch, partner, head of Entertainment Sports Law at Gowling. And here I have Casey Chisick, who's a partner at Cassels and Blackwell. I have then Bill Rosenblatt. He's the president of GiantSteps Media Technology Strategies and also the Adjunct professor at Stanford School of Culture, Education, and Human Development in New York University. And at the end of this table, I have Laura Levin, who is the director of Sensorium, a Center for Digital Arts and Technology. She's also an associate professor at the Department of Theater and Performance, School of the Arts, Media Performance and Design at New York University, and director of Hemispheric Encounters Network. So I will now launch into the conversation with my panelists. So I will ask you, as a way of introduction, to tell us about yourself and how your work engages with the topic of societal impacts of AI in innovation. And I will start with my left.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here. I'm very happy. I made my way to Toronto several times in the past few years. I went to school with Pina. We went to Oxford. I'm just a bit older than you. And I have Pina as a friend, and Aviv as a friend, and many in the crowd. I am not a classical AI scholar. I guess no one is, because it comes from somewhere. I'm an intellectual property scholar. I fancy philosophy, so you will get a bit of it today, but promise only bits that's maybe related to the practical aspects of the discussion. I'm the dean of the Radzyner Law School in Herzliya in Israel. Whenever I say I'm the dean, I feel I'm I'm not sure if I should recommend taking any such post to anyone, but this is between me and myself. Now, and I'm the head of the master's program. We have a very unique master's program that deals with AI at our law school. Aviv and myself, when he came back to Israel, we jointly established a joint master's program with Professor Greenbaum, who's in the crowd as well, on law, technology, and business innovation that trains together lawyers and non-law graduates who want to work in the industry. AI, tech, regulation, IP, and more. Again, thanks a lot for the invitation, Pina. Happy, very happy to be here.
Next. So I'm Susan Abramovitch. I'm a practicing lawyer at Gowling, which is now an international law firm, but my office is based here in Toronto. I'm the head of the Entertainment and Sports Law Group, and I've been practicing entertainment law for almost 30 years now. And believe it or not, I did other kinds of law before that. I'm a transactional lawyer, so my client base really ranges from creators to companies that commercialize entertainment products. I also do sports. And so how my work engages with AI and all the issues that have come up really is on a day-to-day, mainly contractual focus and rights focus on, so from a creator's perspective, what inputs can they use to create their work and what tools can they use without risking infringement or loss of copyright protection in their ultimate output. And for companies or producers that are acquiring content, figuring out what exactly are they acquiring, what rights, how far do their rights extend when it comes to AI, and then also sort of avoiding passing on rights when they're not sure that they've gotten everything they thought they were getting. So all the issues of whether there is copyright in AI-generated works is very much on top of mind for both sides.
I'm Chisick. I am a partner and head of entertainment and IP law at Cassels, Blackwell, which is a national law firm with offices in Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary. My own office is here. Like Susan, I have a transactional practice in entertainment law where I engage with a lot of the same issues on the AI side. I also have a litigation element to my practice where these issues come up in different ways, right? And more we're being consulted by clients with deep concerns on both the input side and the output side in terms of what they can do and what others can do with what they create. And what's interesting about it for me, because before I went into private practice, I was a law professor. And so I spent a lot of time in those days thinking not only about what the law was, but what the law should be. And at this moment in time, we have a real opportunity and as lawyers an obligation to think about both those things, right? And we're really at the beginning of a new frontier, it feels like, in terms of the way AI interacts both with intellectual property law as well as with other areas of law, ranging from privacy to national security to even basic contract law. Right? And so these days, I spend a lot of time, almost on a daily basis, thinking about all those issues, advising clients, and the third sort of pillar of my practice is government relations. And so in that capacity, I also work with clients to help in their dealings with the federal and provincial governments and to help sort of understand how the law is being shaped and how the law might be shaped going forward. So it's really a pleasure to be here. It's also a pleasure to have been invited by Pina to be one of the inaugural advisory board members of the new Center of Case. Really excited to digging in both today and going forward on all of these issues.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Rosenblatt. I run a consulting firm called GiantSteps Media Technology Strategies, which deals with issues of intellectual property for digital media or media in the digital age. It's really an honor to be here. I'd like to thank Pina for inviting me. I run a conference called Copyright and Technology, and last September we had the distinct pleasure of having Pina be our keynote speaker. She did a tremendous job. I teach at NYU, I teach at New York University, not York University. It's in this little city south of the border somewhere. And I teach in the music business program. I am also the co-author of a new book called Key Changes, the 10 Times Technology Transformed the Music Industry, which is basically about a series of disruptions that happened to the music business through technological innovations that came together to produce a series of formats for distributing music to the public, and the latest one of those is AI. So I think we're going to talk about that today on this panel. Right now, I work as an expert witness in litigation having to do with the subject matter. In fact, right now I'm involved in a matter on behalf of our sponsor today, Microsoft, as it turns out, just by coincidence. And I'm also working with the Authors Guild, which is the US trade association for authors of book and other content, to develop what we call a blanket licensing platform for AI usage of content, both on the training and the output side. Let's see, what else? I work on public policy issues related to copyright and digital media around the world. I've worked with the World Intellectual Property Organization, the European Commission, as Korean Copyright Commission, South Korea, as well as various entities in the United States. So,
You play any instruments?
do you play any instruments? So Casey and
We play in
I
a band together.
are in a band together. It is the house band of the Copyright Society. The band is called Crude, Humble, and Obvious, and if you Google that, you will see a US Supreme Court decision come up. Casey plays keyboards, I play guitar. And I'll stop there, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion. It's great to be here in Toronto. Okay.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Levin. As was said before, I'm a theater prof, so an interesting choice for this panel. I'm also the director of Sensorium, which is a research center for digital arts and technology at university. The focus of our work there is in functioning as a kind of incubator for community-led and technologically engaged artistic practices and artistic research. I'm also the partnerships lead of the Connected Minds project, and Sensorium, which I run, is one of the organized research units that's centrally involved in the project as well. So what do I do? So with my Connected Minds and Sensorium hats on, I think a lot of my job is about facilitating various kinds of critical dreaming. I work with faculty members and students to help them take big risks and imagine incredible new creative projects that are engaging with the social impacts of technologies, particularly emerging technologies. And increasingly, these projects are turning more and more to experimenting with AI in various ways. I'm also a theater artist and an intermediate artist. I'm a dramaturg, a director, and sometimes an actor. And singer, sometimes too. I am interested in my own work in the special role that artists can play in decoding or revealing the hidden biases in various emerging technologies. Thinking here about, for example, beauty algorithms that are trained on models of whiteness, or smart technologies police use to comb through social media to find persons of interest. And I'm especially interested in my new work in the ways in which algorithms produce political polarization and disinformation on social networks, and the special role that artists might play in helping to disrupt that kind of division and build various kinds of bridges. In particular, because I think that artists are complicit in various ways in that polarization through the use of through AI-generated imagery. So that's neat.
Thank you so much. As you can see, we have a wide range of diversity, and to be honest, during the prep, we did talk about the incredible musical talent of
Bill Rosenblatt.
our band. So now that you've introduced
Case.
yourself, maybe I'll just do another round with you to speak to some of the developments that you have observed in the arts and media landscape, and some of the challenges that you see and ways of overcoming them as we get more into the AI technology. So maybe I'll start with you again, Laura. We'll start again.
Okay, so thank you. There are a lot of interesting developments and challenges. I'm trying to limit myself here. I'll mention two challenges. First of all, in the context of the arts community, there's been a lot of discussion, obviously, about the replacement of human artists with AI. We're seeing more and more AI creating moving and beautiful artwork, AI composing really phenomenal symphonies. Go back to music we were talking about before. And particularly in the context of the screen industry, fears of digital doubles replacing human actors, which was a central issue in the SAG-AFTRA strike. And similarly, playwrights and screenwriters who I'm working with are concerned about how their writing is being recycled or pillaged or appropriated, use whatever verb you want, by different kinds of AI systems like ChatGPT, like DALL-E, insert other AI systems. And the concern that these systems can spit out scripts that are pretty good and at relatively low cost. So a big question that we're asking in my community is if machines can emulate or surpass human creativity, what becomes unique about an artist's skills or unique voice? The second development or challenge that I'll mention, which I think we'll get into a little bit later too, is how AI art or aesthetics enshrine the prosumer in this process. So how do processes of customization and creating objects in the image of the prosumer actually work, and what are the impacts on artistic creation? It seems more and more that the goal of art is to meet the desires of audiences and to be catered specifically to their tastes. Everything is sort of is based on customizable taste bubbles, and there's fewer and fewer opportunities to work towards shared visions. So those, in combination with these larger questions around kind of the mass appropriation of artistic work, are things that we're wrestling with. And then more philosophically, I'll just add that we're kind of wrestling with this question of what is left that's meaningful in our artistic world, and where AI falls short. What kind of qualities do we want to hold on to in art? Where is the human and embodied piece of what we're doing, and is this leading to some kind of dehumanizing future? I don't believe that it is, but these are the kinds of conversations that we're having within the artistic community. Should we just pass down?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, so there's so much that I could talk about, and I'll try to focus in on a couple of issues. I am by background a technologist. Back in the Pleistocene era, when mastodons roamed the earth, I was a software engineer, and I studied AI in graduate school. So I look at, and I'm a pragmatist, right? So I look at where are we today and what can we do about it based on where we are. So right now in the world that Casey and Susan inhabit, and others in this room, we're waiting for various court decisions to determine the strength of copyright protection in the world of AI. And while we're waiting for that to happen, which is a process that will take years to play out, we're looking at how do we solve various technical problems that relate to copyright. One of them is how do we identify content that's created by AI or that's created by humans, and how do we make that identification persist throughout the lifespan of that content. So for example, if you have a hit song, music being the area that I'm most familiar with, but you can think of analogies in other types of content. If you have a hit song, what parts of that were created by humans, what parts of that were created by AI-assisted tools, and whatnot. And a real hard, pragmatic example of this right now in the US is US Copyright Office has decided that it will not allow registration of as copyright of any content that was created by AI tools. That's going to lead to all kinds of problems down the line. What does that even mean, AI tools? Because in my opinion, and here's a hot take to start out our late morning, early afternoon, AI is a marketing term. It doesn't really mean anything. So there are going to be a lot of hard questions about this. How do we identify the stuff? Can we detect AI-generated content? There are a lot of companies out that purport to have those solutions. Do they really? Is it going to be an arms race? And so on. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And then the other thing that I want to mention now, because I think we're going to get into a lot of these topics during the next hour or so, is generative AI represents an inflection point in the amount, the volume, the sheer volume of content that somebody can generate. And so, for example, Spotify has more or less 100 million songs in its catalog that are available within any one country. And there are AI music startups such as Boomi and Mubert that will tell you our customers or our users have already used our technology to generate roughly that many songs over a period of minutes or days or whatever it is. That doesn't mean they're all on Spotify, but it's just the sheer volume, and how is that going to affect how the mechanics of the industry operate. I think we're in for some seismic changes there, and we do have some parallels to draw on from previous inflection points, from things like the advent of the tape recorder and its use after World War II, the advent of the home 4-track cassette deck, which democratized to some extent the making of music in the 1980s, the advent of digital distributors in the 2000s. These are all inflection points in volume. We're dealing with an inflection point now, a very large inflection point, and that's going to have all kinds of implications for the industry. So those are just some of the issues that I look at, and I'm going to stop there because all kinds of people on this panel have all kinds of other interesting things to talk about.
You know what I find interesting? I speak on a lot of panels, and rarely do I sit at a table like this and see everybody madly scribbling down notes as the others talk, right? And I think that does reflect, you know, the newness and the importance of some of these issues that we're talking about. In a sense, though, I agree with Bill that this is one of an easily identifiable series of inflection points at the intersection of technology and creativity and distribution. What makes the advent of generative AI a little different from other changes we've seen is that previously most of these inflection points had to do with the distribution and dissemination of content, right? This has to do with the creation of content, which is something very, very different because, as Laura said, what it does is present some direct challenges to human authorship. And that is kind of a sea change, and it's something that we need to grapple with, and we are starting to grapple with in a very different way, because not only does it lead to misleading appearances at times in terms of the origins and the provenance of content, it also engages that very human element of the integrity of authors and of creators. And that is a little different from other things that we've seen. Not only does it create employment issues, as we've seen, as Laura said, in the Hollywood strikes, it creates copyright-related issues around compensation, around transparency and accountability, as I said, the provenance of works. It creates integrity issues that we need to examine and confront and figure out how to deal with. The important thing, though, that I see is that a market is beginning to develop here, right? There's a temptation, anytime something new comes along, there's a temptation for everybody to want to sort of jump in and start inhabiting the space, not only from a business perspective, but also from a legal and a regulatory perspective. And the temptation is great to jump in and start regulating things and making rules before we even really understand what it is we're regulating, right? And the best example that I can think of right now is the litigation that was recently commenced between the New York Times and OpenAI and Microsoft. And what's interesting about that, apart from the legal issues, is the background for that case, because what that arose from the ashes of failed negotiations between the parties. And what that tells me more than anything is that there's kind of a mutual understanding and acceptance on the part of both content owners and AI systems developers. In the content owners case, there's a willingness to explore licensing on commercial terms. In the systems case, there's some understanding that licenses will need to be obtained. And so in my discussions with government, some of the people in this room, I keep reminding people that what that adds up to is the development of a fledgling market. Let's let that market develop and grow, and then we will evaluate what needs to be regulated and what needs to be legislated about it. Let's not start legislating things we don't understand, and let's not create a market failure rather than addressing one if and when it arises. I am of the view, and I think we're going to talk about this today, I'm of the view that AI can help address a lot of the challenges that it creates, right? When we talk about AI these days, we're very often thinking about generative AI, right? But generative AI is not the only thing out there, right? I see a very important role for artificial intelligence to play in licensing. And I made a note earlier about the work that Bill's doing with the Authors Guild, because I want to hear more about that. Because from an individual licensing perspective, and even more so from a collective licensing perspective, it is very obvious to me that AI will have a huge role to play in work identification, in transparency, in accountability, in sort of creating and monitoring and dealing with the digital DNA of works, right? So I see a ton of opportunity as opposed to just challenges, and I think it's fascinating for us to sit back and watch and participate in this new market as it develops.
Thank you very much. I'll continue on this side, but I just have some reflection to do, because you raised a really interesting point in terms of how this temptation to step in and regulate versus letting the market kind of figure things out. I think that I think governments are concerned. Obviously, the federal government might be thinking that we give too much time and space. In the past when the internet was developing, and then we took a long time to start regulating that space. And then the other question would be in this recognition, like when people discuss and negotiate and want to figure out this licensing arrangement, which I think is the right way to go, like, is there a balance of power that will arrive at arrangements that are equitable for all sides? So, but we'll discuss this further. We'll come back.
Well, that's an interesting point, because remember, I come from the ground up, right? My clients are there trying to figure out what to do now. So while I agree that rushing to legislate and legislate badly is probably a bad idea, what we're left with and what one of the main challenges is the unknowns. And again, we don't like the unknowns generally from a policy perspective, but like I have artists coming to me and saying, okay, I really want to use AI because it's a helpful tool, it helps my creation, it leads to efficiencies, but am I going to get sued because these are derivative works? Or am I going to be deprived of protection so that when I sell my work and try to commercialize it, people can steal it because there is no copyright protection? And so those are the challenges on the ground level, and so we can all wait to get it right, but frankly, to some degree, I think certainty, even if it's bad, I hate to say this, is better than no certainty, because what we're left with, what practitioners like me are left with on the ground, is trying to figure it out in the contract as best we can, and it's messy. So to me, that's the biggest challenge right now, is on the ground, the unknowns of whether my clients can be sued, or whether they can protect, whether they have anything of value at the end of the day, and how to contract to deal with that kind of thing.
Thank you. First of all, Casey and Bill, I play the French one. Okay.
You're in.
That's a tough one.
There are major copyright problems when it comes to AI, but I don't think any of the problems is insurmountable. First of all, generally speaking, I'd like to relate my comments to the previous panel, and I think the challenges and the examples when it comes to AI can be squeezed into two main tensions within the AI discourse. First of all, encourage or discourage AI. In order to understand how to regulate or predict the difficulties that lie in the future due to AI, we ought to think of AI's family tree. Where did it come from? And I think we can find many solutions when we look at the history of IP, tort, property law misappropriation, unjust enrichment, unfair competition. Problems associated with IP and AI deal with roughly the same issues. The main question is how to protect rights, and you were right that there are questions that you cannot find answer to them. Now, by the way, these questions, and I said something about philosophy, these questions were at the heart of the 1693 letter of John Locke to the House of Commons, debating the first Copyright Act, whether to protect, not protect, encourage or discourage, and he decided that we should encourage learning and protect creative spaces where knowledge is created and from where it is shipped to users and then get disseminated. So here's the answer. Now the second tension, and that also relates to the previous panel, is between pessimists and optimists. I do not really understand the pessimism when it comes to AI. We've been there before with social networks, with internet, with nuclear weapons. So I'm not pessimistic when it comes to AI evolution, and I don't think it will affect our life in a bad way. I'm actually optimistic, dare I say romantic, when it comes to AI. Well, I don't think a human being will marry a robot very soon, although they predict that by 2050 the first marriage will happen, and according to statistics, in 2070 they'll get divorced. But I am optimistic. Some of us tend to go a bit astray when it comes to calls that AI systems introduce threats to society. Now, when it comes to copyright law, AI is the new medium of copyright manipulations. The threats are not without basis. Now, when we address copyright questions, we engage with questions, as I said, with which we've dealt before, but now they come to the forefront of the AI debate. Who is the author of an AI work? Where is the work? By the way, I have answers to all of my questions. Is it, on EU terms, the author's own intellectual creation? If only a spark of creativity is required, can machine create? In other words, what effect would AI have on the arts, music, and media information? And should we feel under threat or uncomfortable because we cannot really predict the future? We couldn't predict the future before. If John Locke was alive today and sitting in the crowd, then he would have said that probably machines cannot have natural basic rights because they have not been born human and embedded with natural rights. But more importantly, I think he would say that AI does not spell the end of copyright law or, for that sake, democracy. Now, historian Yuval Noah Harari recently warned us that bad governments and administrators will use AI to introduce bad laws that would make even George Orwell be rather blush. I think we've been in that story before. I say it again and again. Anti-democratic agendas existed and will continue to exist, using tech and biological advancements to curtail basic rights and normal community life. You can take, for example, China, that continuously persecutes and abuses certain communities. Chinese tech companies have registered patents that the Chinese Communist Party can use to identify minorities and trace their acts. Well, what I'm trying to say is that futuristic predictions about AI mimic predictions when tech was just erupted. Now, if we take this to the area of artists and authors, generative tools can produce high-quality copyrighted works, text by instruction and artwork from text prompts, using artistic styles, keywords, familiar concepts, and more. In February 2022, the winning photo in an Australian photography competition was created by AI-generated tools. Few months later, the same year, the crowd and an AI-made film won the jury award at the Cannes Short Film Festival, and in September the same year, an artist used text-to-image software to take the top prize in the Colorado Art Festival. And I can repeat what my friends in the panel said about the lawsuits against OpenAI, but I think we'll continue and then I can address more.
Thank you so much. Now I'd like to just take you to, give our audience, concrete examples or case studies that would illustrate some of the challenges that you see, things where the industry is at, so that we can kind of concretely understand what we're dealing with, but also where the unknowns are and how people are trying to navigate that space right now. We'll start with Casey.
Okay. Well, the obvious one in entertainment and the arts, well, there are two, right? Laura mentioned already the Hollywood strikes, where one of the key issues was the potential for AI to affect the livelihoods of performers and writers, right? Whether it's AI assistance in writing and rewriting content, whether it's the use of digital doubles, representing known actors, whether it's the use of synthetic performers that don't actually resemble or any known actors, but are nevertheless created using the facial expressions and movements and affectations of human performers, and then ultimately have the potential to reduce employment opportunities for real human beings. So that led to one of the longest strikes in the history of Hollywood, which anyone who's trying to go to a movie these days can tell the pipeline's a little bit dry unless you want to see Dune or Madame Web. Will the solutions be durable in terms of what's been decided for performers? Will it actually protect them in the way they think they need to be protected? Will writers find respite from the ravages of AI? I'm being dramatic on purpose here, because I think the answer is no, and I think that's okay. I think that we are at the very beginning of understanding how AI is going to interact with human creativity. And so I think that the solutions that have been arrived at tentatively or preliminarily in Hollywood are constructive. But I think it's just the beginning, and like Lior, I'm not convinced that the sky is falling. I think that we're at the dawn of a new era in terms of how technology and creativity combine. The other one that I find really interesting, ripped out of the headlines in the last month or so, is the dispute between the Universal Music Group and TikTok, right? And there, it's about money, right? Anytime somebody tells you it's not just about the money, you know it's just about the money. But actually, in this case, it's not just about the money, right? Because one of the issues that Universal is most concerned about, and this is public knowledge, is that TikTok is a platform that is increasingly flooded with AI-generated recordings. It also is developing and deploying tools that enable or facilitate or encourage AI-assisted music creation on the platform itself, right? And so that implicates the human authorship and integrity issues, but here's where it's about the money. It also dilutes the pool of royalties that are available for human authors to share in on that platform, right? And so we're seeing almost every day new sort of iterations of friction between traditional human authorship and generative AI. And these are the challenges that Susan and I are dealing with in our practices all the time. Where it stops, we don't know. But as I say, I think there are a lot of chapters still to be written, maybe by ChatGPT, maybe not, in how this all plays out and where we end up.
Other panelists, Susan, did you want to add to this?
Well, of course, Casey picked off my 2 examples.
Oh, sorry.
Were you looking at my notes?
I haven't written down.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time because I was going to talk about Universal Music Publishing and Universal Music Group with TikTok as well. What I find interesting and perhaps comforting a little bit there is that it's an example of parties using the power of their protected copyrights to make a point and exert influence over the inflection point that TikTok is seeing in its use of AI. Because TikTok, at least at this moment, needs Universal Music Publishing and Universal Music Group copyrighted materials, because that's what their user base wants. And Universal said, well, you're not going to get it unless you give us concessions on the A side. So that was going to be my example as well.
I can. Do you want?
Oh, you can go next. I can go after.
Okay. Well, all right. So while Casey and Susan were talking, I was thinking, okay, which of these two should I have 2 possible examples? And the one that I decided to focus on is, again, this issue of inflection point in the output of generative AI on the volume of content that's available. And so we're on the cusp of something that's going to really change the dynamics of the industry. As a lot of you probably know, in music, the vast majority of activity and revenue comes from streaming, from platforms like Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, and so on. And recently, Spotify announced a series of changes in the way they're calculating royalties, which I think presage some tough decisions that are going to be made in the age of AI. among the things that they announced were they're not going to pay any royalties on tracks that generate less than 1,000 plays, I think it's per year, which actually constitutes something like 40%, rough terms, 40% of all the tracks in Spotify's catalog. 40% of 100 million get very few plays. So they're doing that, and they've also decided to up the threshold, the length of time that someone has to listen to a track for it to qualify for royalties at all, for so-called noise tracks, from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, I believe it is. And this is all part of an initiative that the major music companies are engaging in, particularly Universal Music Group. They're trying to differentiate, they're trying to get these platforms to differentiate between human-created premium music, for lack of a better word, and stuff that isn't that, such as AI-created music. So ambient sounds and things that you might like to listen to for studying, those fall under that heading now. Those have been under discussion for a few years. But the objective of the major music companies is to get their content that is presumably not AI generated privileged over the AI stuff. And that's going to lead to some tough decisions about, on the part of these platforms like Spotify, what do we accept for ingestion in our catalog? How do we treat these different kinds of content? And some of this, speaking as an ex-IT guy, comes from the purely pragmatic consideration of where in heck are we going to put all this stuff if we're going to get all this content? Where are we going to store it? How are we going to manage it? It's going to cost us a lot of money. A lot of these tracks don't do anything, but we have to pay to manage them and deal with them anyway. And so we're really just this latest thing from Spotify, which generated a good deal of controversy, particularly among the indie music community, is just the first warning shot in a series of big decisions that these platforms are going to make that will take them away from we're the universal library, we have everything.
I think one of those big decisions that you haven't mentioned, but I know you must be thinking about, I certainly am, is whether those companies are going to become content creators themselves, right? And use their vast libraries of third-party content that they offer to create AI-assisted or AI-generated content of their own that they don't necessarily expect to pay royalties on.
So for example, and I'll give you a specific example of this, Deezer, which is headquartered in France, it's very well known worldwide, not so much in the US. They have announced that they're not going to accept noise tracks, or they're not going to pay anything out on noise tracks. They're going to make their own. So that's one example of this. And TikTok has already signed A&R people to sign their own artists and develop their own stuff. Spotify hasn't really gone in that direction yet, but Casey's point is an excellent one.
Thank you so much. I'll go to Laura.
Sure. I can't speak directly to what was just being discussed, but I want to say one thing before I provide my answer. I'm really interested in this panel and in the last panel in the words optimism and pessimism as they relate to kind of these questions around AI. One thing that I wonder is what would a form of this discussion be that wasn't thinking simply in those binary terms? Because we tend to say, oh, well, I have an optimistic view of AI, or I have a pessimistic view of AI in relation to this. And my sense is that, particularly for people in minoritized communities, that the idea of critique isn't necessarily always perceived as a form of pessimism, but in critique we can also hear a hope for a better world. So I just say that has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I felt like it needed to be said. Just in terms of case studies, I'll mention two things really briefly. I was talking a little bit before, we were talking about challenges, about the challenges around recommender algorithms and these questions around personalization and what they mean for artists. there are questions that are coming up for people within my research center, for example, about how AI is now being used in the context of things like Netflix to measure attention spans down to the second. And this is now having an impact on the ways in which scripts are commissioned and written. And as well, what kinds of shows are picked up. So I don't know if people are familiar with the Baroness von Sketch show. This is the show I most recently acted on. And the creator, Carolyn Taylor, we had her speak at York recently, and she was talking about how difficult it is for her as a queer female creator to actually get her work picked up. Because it doesn't fit into the mold in terms of narrative structure of what you would see under queer like content. It doesn't quite work in terms of the rhythms that they're looking for. So that's just one example. I also want to say something about the fact that AI, this is something I didn't talk about last time, but in terms of developments, that AI is also expanding the possibilities of human expression in very interesting ways. That it also makes possible, it allows for the imagining of different kinds of social worlds. And I'm thinking, Casey, about your point earlier in the first round. I think it was the first or maybe it was the second. You're talking about the opportunities here for transparency. I think there are a role that artists can play is not only around helping to discern what is AI, but also helping to discern who makes it and at what cost. So one of my favorite new pieces of AI theater is a piece called I Agree to the Terms by the Builders Association, which is situated in New York City, very often also San Francisco, which gives us a kind of behind-the-scenes look at algorithm design through an immersive theater show. The spectators in the show are receiving job training from real M-Turkers, which is a community of underpaid micro workers who provide the human data that's needed to train algorithms. And as we sit there sort of taking these surveys and feeding the system information about our religious beliefs, about our dating preferences and things like that, it gives us a real opportunity to think about who is involved in creating these algorithms, who's not seen and who is seen, and what the kind of larger capitalist costs and also human costs are of harvesting data. So I see a lot of, from a critical perspective, critical, hopeful perspective, a lot of potential in that kind of work.
Yeah, I have my own, two examples now. These examples obviously deal with art and authorship, but not of the immediate, not the kind of examples that we normally talk about. Both examples are part of my research about the future of AI, understanding or distorting history. Now, my first example is about distorting history, and I allow myself to take the Holocaust as an example. Recently, Holocaust AI has generated images that distort history we are facing, and here I'm not very optimistic. We are facing what could become a new disruptive shift in the field of Holocaust remembrance. AI is becoming more and more adopted by heritage institutions, museums, and commercial companies that organize information that relates to Holocaust and other atrocities and genocides. From search engines scrolling billions of virtual worlds to hologram-like interfaces allowing visitors to converse with virtual embodiments of survivors, to chatbots used by museums and other institutions to help users find relevant sources, AI transforms how we, as both individuals and communities, inform ourselves about the Holocaust. It also creates a new range of risks, from enabling new possibilities for Holocaust denial and distortion to undermining the concept of historical authenticity by generating fake historical content, to posing new privacy risks related to the disclosure of sensitive information about those who were killed. Last month, on February 2024, The Telegraph has published that anti-Semites are using AI to promote Holocaust denial. The technology was misused to create offensive Anna Frank images, a Hitler chatbot, and Auschwitz pictures featuring a roller coaster. These manipulations also raise questions about illegal and harmful copyright, but this, I guess, is another topic. It brings me to the conclusion that we need strong regulations when it comes to this. Now, the second example is understanding history. And this I found in a recent newspaper. AI has assisted in deciphering papyrus scrolls destroyed with Pompeo while the Vesuv mountain has erupted. An expert has declared revolution in that respect. A University of Nebraska student was at a party in August when he received a text that would help him decipher a nearly 2,000-year-old message. In the previous few months, Luke Ferriter has joined a worldwide competition to translate ancient Roman scrolls that were damaged by a volcanic eruption, which I mentioned. And the 21-year-old computer science major had developed an artificial intelligence program to detect the charred Greek letters written on papyrus. So AI has many faces that we need to take into account.
Thank you so much for that. So yes, we've heard different examples, stories of how content is created. I would like to maybe now take our panelists on this questions of the ethical considerations surrounding the use of AI-generated content, and in terms of either the copyright as well as biases, misinformation, privacy, and so on. So I don't know, Laura, you had, I don't know if you want to start, and then we'll go to other speakers as well.
Sure. So we're talking about the ethical considerations. Where to start? Are we thinking about this specifically? This is the question. Oh, in terms of misinformation. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about kind of some of the things that artists are thinking about. Some things I'm thinking about right now. A lot of my work is about the place where AI meets politics. So thinking a lot about the ways in which AI-generated artwork is being used in election cycles. We can think about just last week, I think it was, Marjorie Taylor Greene circulating an image of Biden in front of a red Chinese flag, which is obviously an AI-generated image, with a tweet saying bought and sold by the Chinese. There's been lots of interesting reporting about the use of AI-generated videos and images in the Argentinian election, where one of the candidates was represented as in a video talking about the importance of harvesting human organs. We had a conversation at the break about what the implications are of this kind of AI and generated imagery for not only fueling different kinds of political polarization and disinformation, but also in creating mistrust of journalistic sources. We already have people like Trump talking about news being fake, so there's a distrust of traditional news sources. But there's also a distrust because the people who we think that we trust in certain news channels like CBC, there are images of them or videos of them saying things that they haven't said. So this is a real problem. And then I think also kind of ethically, another issue that artists are thinking about is how are we complicit in making some of the more harmful aspects of AI seem sexy and cool. So if we're using these technologies to create glitzy, immersive art experiences, or various other, I've heard of ChatGPT cabarets, for example. These are really exciting, expansive uses of AI as a medium, but at the same time, it is potentially playing into certain kinds of corporate objectives. We're offering ourselves up to be surveilled in different ways. Our data is being used in different ways in these very contexts. So it's a thing that artists are now wrestling with very much.
You know, I said earlier that I didn't think the sky was falling necessarily, and that is true. I don't think the sky is falling from a copyright standpoint. I don't think the sky is falling from a creativity standpoint. This is a place where I think the sky might actually be falling, because I think that this is, what we're experiencing at this moment in time is a really dangerous collision between the capacity of generative AI and what is already becoming, if it hasn't already become, a post-truth society, right? In a world where the truth is seen to be whatever you want it to be, whatever you think it should be. I've often been heard to say that two words that should never be used together are my and truth, because I think that there is the truth, right? And we may have different perspectives on truth, but truth is truth. There's an objectivity to truth. And thanks to the efforts of people like Trump and others who have successfully undermined faith in objective sources, and thanks to some of those sources themselves who have given us good reason to doubt their own objectivity, we are in a place now as a society where trust has never been more compromised, right, in our news sources and in one another. Add to that now the capacity of generative AI to create appearances, reliable appearances, credible appearances of things that are just not true. And we're facing real difficulty as a society. I hadn't heard about the example that you gave earlier, Lior, with Holocaust, but it occurred to me while you were speaking that from the standpoint of distortion of history, that can happen maliciously. It can also happen innocently. It's not hard to imagine cases where well-meaning museums and other institutions want to use AI-generated holographs or other content to help explain and bring history to life, but do it in a way that is less objective than they intended to be. And it has an impact on human understanding of human history. These are the things that literally keep me up at night, because we are at a moment in time when we're dealing with really combustible global conflict. We're dealing with a world that has become, in many ways, really frightening. And then add into that the ability of AI to generate false appearances in a really credible way, that's a very difficult situation. So yeah, strong regulation. These are things that we all need to turn our minds to, and that's got nothing to do with copyright or creativity.
Yeah. Could I just follow up on that? Thanks. So these are all very thought-provoking ideas, but I want to throw a little bit of a curve into this. As I said a little while ago, AI, in my opinion, is kind of a very fluffy, almost meaningless term. When I studied AI in grad school, when mastodons roamed the earth, it meant a bunch of different things, some of which would be considered laughably trivial today. Even now versus 2 years ago, the definition has changed. And some of the things that you described, Laura, I'm not familiar with them, so I can't say for certain, but I'm thinking, you don't need AI to generate an image of Joe Biden in front of a Chinese flag. You can do that without, quote, AI, unquote. And so this on the one hand, what I said about the inflection point in the ability to generate stuff applies here. There's an inflection point in the ability to generate lots and lots and lots of blatantly false and maliciously misleading content, and we're absolutely seeing a ton of that right now, but not necessarily through what we call AI right now or what we might call AI in the future, which is where the risk lies in regulation. And so, I think that the U.S. Copyright Office tried to say something more detailed than AI generated, you can't get a registration. They tried to make a definition of what that means to be AI generated. I frankly don't trust it to be worth anything beyond 6 months, maybe. And so this is another dimension that we have to worry about here.
Thank you so much. So maybe I will push you a little bit on this, because now we don't want to stay or remain in that negative space. Given these huge risks with respect to the creation of harmful content, these deep fakes that can further polarize society and again deepen this phenomenon of disinformation, misinformation. Like when you talk about regulations, like what does that look like? How do we ensure that this accountability, transparency of the content that is being created by or generated by AI? I don't know. Many of you have mentioned regulations or ways of addressing these things. So, Casey?
Well, I can start. Like anything in society, it's all a joke until it affects Taylor Swift. Right? And so we saw 6 or 8 weeks ago legislation introduced in the U.S. Congress dealing with deep fakes. I love the way they name their bills in the U.S. This is the Defiance Act. It stands for Disrupt Explicit Forced Images and Non-Consensual Edits. Defiance. But it's very, very specific. It really deals with deep fake pornography, because that was what affected Taylor Swift at that moment. And these are issues that have been bubbling through Congress for a while now. Strong regulation against AI-generated, altered images that put individuals in apparently compromising positions in terms of their intimate lives. Great. That's a great first step. To call it the tip of the iceberg is to assume a really, really small iceberg, right? There's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of regulating the relationship between individual privacy and not only generative AI, but other forms of AI too, right? In terms of transparency and regulation, we're starting to see that develop, not only in the US and overseas, but in Canada too, through the AI legislation that's working its way now through Parliament, where we would begin to introduce both legislatively and regulatorily requirements for AI systems to track the data that they're using to train their models and keep that information available in prescribed ways and make that information available to prescribed people under prescribed circumstances in order to try and preserve some integrity in these systems so that we understand what's being used. That's also really important, and it's heartening to see that the government is continuing to try and move the ball forward on that and not assume that the bill that was first tabled is perfect, because it's not. We need to keep doing that important work. So many different things, and I'm interested to hear what Lior has to say about it too, but so many different aspects of the relationship between AI and society need to be examined for the protection of that very society, for the protection of human beings and the way we interact not only with technology but with one another, right? There's not a more important issue on the table, in my opinion.
Lior, did you want to?
I think you were called
Your colleague has
I called you out.
reached
Lior.
out.
I'm trying to organize my the things I want to say. Does anyone want to say anything before I go?
I'll make a brief comment.
Okay.
I have a one-word answer to this question that Joëlle posed. And the word is expertise. We need expertise to be brought to bear in these regulatory and legislative processes. We need to raise that several levels of magnitude from what it's been in the past. And I think U.S. Congress is trying to do that. And so they should get credit for trying at least, but you've got this imbalance of how long it takes to pass regulations and to establish case law precedents and so forth versus the march of technology. But the best that you can hope for is to bring expertise to bear where in the past little or none has been brought to bear.
Okay, I have several comments.
I gave you enough time to
You
get your thoughts together.
did.
Vamp until ready.
Yeah, exactly.
Few comments. Some of them will relate to the questions and to the aspect discussed. First of all, you mentioned here the US regulates and the US enacts and the European Union regulates, directives, regulations, whatever. AI is not a local problem. We have to think of AI globally. And as we did for TK, as we did for copyright, as we did for visually impaired people, as we did for patents, since the 19th century, right? I think we should do it for AI. This is one comment. Now I can say a few things about the good and the bad, and I won't finish with the bad, okay? So I'll start with the bad because it's something about the negativity of the conversation. We need to look very careful about the ethics of AI. Very careful. This is one thing, because we see that the difference or the gap between truth and false is blurring, and it is a cause for concern. And it brings to mind, well, the fact that AI is here to stay reminds me, Pina, one of your articles, I think it was my apology 20 years ago, about fair use, right? McGill Law Journal, you said something about the culture of fear. We cannot allow copyright to become or to establish a culture of fear. We will pay for everything, we will not use things. We should look at AI as creating a culture of freedom, not a culture of fear. Now, a few good things, I think. I have no concerns about employment, because there were plenty concerns when certain cultural icons went into the public domain and the American entertainment industry did not go bankrupt. This is one thing. Second, when it comes to education, I think we'll see many advantages with AI. For example, in my university, the president decided that as from next year, every course in the first year, in every school, will have an AI element just to introduce students to leave the stuff aside. We don't know anything about AI, but students will know. And third, the creative artists and authors. I think this is the first time authors and artists have access to so much information. They never had this access, and I trust we will see new waves of creativity coming out of this AI generation. Something like maybe AI cubism, AI whatever, but we're just in the beginning.
So I wouldn't mind picking off some of the talk about disinformation about people and Taylor Swift and all that. So one of the things we've been hearing about lately, Music Canada is one, is focusing in on personality rights and rights of publicity. And in a sense, this area is regulated, but at least in Canada, regulated poorly because it's defined by province by case law that isn't very well defined. And so, whether we're talking about disinformation about politicians or we're talking about can you copy Drake in The Weeknd, it's a really good point because practitioners, again, back on the ground, we don't really know what the law is. I'm supposed to be an expert in this field. I've written many articles about it. And frankly, my first answer to clients who ask me about this is I can't really say. I can sort of try to guess. So, of course, so that's an area that actually I personally would embrace some more defined regulation in, or at least the distillation of what the courts are trying to say about it, just so we can have more certainty. But of course, then we'll get into, and of course, there's good reason to try and prevent people from, diluting artists' work by copying in their styles and then confusing the public, and then people think it's New York Times journalism, or they think it's George Carlin's, specials on TV. But then, what can we extend those protections to people in the public sphere and to politicians? And this debate has always been there between balancing freedom of expression, which has been abused in many cases, and protecting people's brands and their images.
All very good points. So there's not much time left, and I might do what my colleague did by opening it up to the audience if you have questions. I see some in the back hallway.
Thank you very much for
Can't hear you, Barry.
Might be off.
Which is good, because I think this is going to be a hard question.
It's working. Can you hear me? So thank you very much for that very stimulating. I have to say, I'm not as sanguine as many of you in terms of what this prize as far as copyright is concerned. I think the architecture of copyright law is never ever intended to deal with this kind of technology. We know it was always assumed that human authors back in cases of that, but nobody ever asked the question on should it be different given the amazing creativity, if you want to use that word, the promise of this technology. There's never been this kind of harvesting or scraping data ever before. Prior, closest example would have been Google and other search engines, but the tremendous difference is the output. The copyright system was developed to deal with a situation where production of work, not in production of minuscule parts of a work to generate something new. So the framework doesn't work. Over history, we've had various types of adaptations in restriction, we've had treaties. My fear here is that given the intentions, AI is global. For any country, particularly a middle country like Canada, to decide how to adapt is going to be tremendously challenging because whatever we do is going to affect innovation. We, on one hand, want to address these issues. On the other hand, we have to realize that our success in the 21st century is going to be able to compete in these accelerated technologies. So, if you think about what is a possibility, right? Well, maybe you could say WIPO will do something, but WIPO is pretty much crippled, and it's very unlikely that WIPO is going to step in. Will we have to add
This is not what they
politics or such to get global standards is going to be difficult, which essentially means that it's going to be courts around the world that are making decisions and not based on a policy framework that steps back because that's out of their purview. So one issue is how does this get addressed on a global basis, given this is a global problem? Copyright owners have rights not just in Canada but around the world. Misinformation, this is going to the core of democracy, and it is a critical problem. The Online Farm Bill that the government introduced does not deal with misinformation. And so we're missing an absolute critical opportunity in this country to deal with misinformation. And the government is just too scared to deal with the issue.
Can I make a couple comments? Hello, is this on?
Yes, it is.
All right, I don't think it is.
It's on and off.
It's kind of blinking in and out. Let's try this one. There you go. So first of all, yeah, WIPO is in the business of trying to get developing countries to square one on things like collective management. They're not in the business of anything having to do with AI from my experience with them. And so, leaving that aside, one note of optimism, tempered optimism, that I would like to posit in response to what you said, Barry, is look for a paradigm here. Look at the use of sampling in music. So sampling can be thought of in many ways as a precursor to generative AI. You have to trace the use of samples through output. There are a lot of parallels in certain ways. And there's been a convention that has arisen around the use of sampling in music. Litigation and case law has something to do with it, and as you said, and as you know, that's on a country-by-country basis, or worse, perhaps. In the US, it might be circuit-by-circuit basis. And that's one element of it. But then there's also just sort of the conventions that arise out of common practice. And so, people who are, like, for example, my wife, who doesn't know much about the law, but she is in the music business, she'll say things to me like, so, you can use less than 10 seconds of a song, right? Like, no, not necessarily. It's a very complicated issue. There's fair use, yada, yada, yada. But there are people in the industry who have a handle on that and have developed that handle over a period of time. I think the same thing's going to happen here. It may be more complicated. It may take a long time. But there will be conventions that will augment what comes out of the courts and any legislation or regulation. And I think that's where we're going to get a handle on this.
Barry, I couldn't agree more when you say that with the Online Harms Act, the government is missing a huge opportunity to get in there at the moment when it's needed most. And I do think that it's motivated by fear. I mean, you and I can both think of many inflection points in the last 25 years where both the government and the courts, all the way to the Supreme Court, have sort of shied away from doing bold things out of fear of breaking the internet, right? And I think we're seeing the same thing right now in that government is reluctant to break AI. And I know that I said earlier that we're watching a market develop and it's important to let the market develop, and I firmly believe that to be true, but there are limits on what the market should do. And there are things that are right and things that are wrong, no matter what the market says, right? And so when it comes to deepfakes and it comes to the other forms of online harm that ought to be regulated, that is not a problem for 5 years down the road once we see what the courts do. That's a problem for right now, and it does call for bold, thoughtful, cautious, in the right way, government action, right? That's for right now. As for copyright, the problem is, WIPO, I agree with Bill, right? WIPO it's not that they were never in the business of doing this, they've just kind of gotten out of the business of doing it gradually. That may need to change, right? Because there's no body that's better positioned, structurally anyway, than WIPO to deal with these new challenges. We saw it happen 25 plus years ago when the WIPO internet treaties were negotiated. It could happen again to the extent that it's needed, but then it falls on individual countries to make sure that whatever is agreed to internationally is translated into action domestically, because those treaties are not self-executing, right? And it took Canada far too long to give effect to its obligations under the WIPO internet treaties. That's the risk, I think, that we face now at this intersection point between copyright and AI.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the question. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I think I see the level of interest, although we're standing between you and lunch, but I can still see that we have all of your attention, and I think it's a testament to how wonderful our distinguished speakers were today. So I want to thank you for taking the time to share your insights and your experience with this audience. And also, I want to thank Pina for setting up this conversation, because again, I think it's through that kind of constructive dialogue, bringing people from different fields, that we will find a way forward to have the intersection of AI and creativity being hopefully a positive one. So thank you so much, and over to you.